before the gods. Before there were gods, before there were heroes, before there were temples rising white against the Mediterranean sky, there was nothing, or perhaps not nothing, but something so formless, so utterly without definition, that the ancient Greeks could only call it chaos. Imagine, if you can, absolute absence. Not darkness as we know it, for darkness implies the possibility of light. Not silence, for silence suggests that sound might someday break through. Chaos was the yawning gap, the primordial void, the space before space itself had meaning. The Greek word chaos means gaping or yawning, a mouth open wide, an abyss with no bottom, no sides, no reference points at all. This is where we must begin, in the time before time, in the place before place. The myths we're about to explore are more than 3,000 years old. They were sung by poets, whispered by priestesses, carved into temple walls, and painted on the sides of wine cups. They are the Greek answer to humanity's most ancient question. How did all of this begin? But these stories are not merely about cosmology, the birth of the universe. They are about power and fear, about fathers and sons, about the terrible anxiety of being replaced. They are about how order emerges from chaos, and what must be destroyed for civilization to be born. Over the next 90 minutes, we will journey from that first formless void to the gleaming heights of Mount Olympus. We will witness the rise and fall of cosmic dynasties. We will see children imprisoned, devoured, and hidden. We will watch as son rises against father, again and again, in a pattern as inevitable as the turning of the seasons. This is the story of the Titanomachy, the war that made the world. This is the story of how the gods we know, the Olympians, came to rule the universe. But it is also the story of what came before them, and what they destroyed to take their throne. The ancient Greeks did not have a single sacred text. They had poets. Chief among them was Hesiod, a shepherd-turned-bard who lived around 700 BCE. His theogony, literally the birth of the gods, is our primary source for this cosmogony. But Hesiod was not inventing these tales from nothing. He was recording a tradition, gathering fragments of older stories, weaving together the mythology of a people who had been telling these stories around fires and in palace halls for generations. When Hesiod sang of chaos, when he described the birth of earth and sky, he was not speaking to philosophers or scientists. He was speaking to farmers, sailors, warriors, people who knew in their bones the power of storm and stone, who felt the earth beneath their feet and wondered where it came from, who looked up at the wheeling stars and asked, "Who set them there?" And the answer the Greeks gave was this: the cosmos was not created by will or word. It was born. It emerged, slowly and painfully, through generation and violence, through rebellion and war. The universe has a family tree, and like all families, it is marked by love and betrayal, by birth and death, by the eternal struggle between parent and child. So let us go back. Back before Zeus hurled his thunderbolts. Back before Prometheus stole fire. Back before Athena sprang from her father's brow or Aphrodite rose from the sea foam. Back before the Trojan War, before the founding of Athens, before any human city lifted its walls toward the sky. Let us go back to the very beginning, to chaos, to the void, to the moment when the first thing, Earth herself, emerged from nothing and began the long, violent story of creation. Are you ready? Then let us begin. In the beginning, there was only chaos. Picture it. Not a place, but the absence of place. Not darkness, but the absence of light and dark alike. The void was complete. There was no up, no down. No earth to stand on, no sky to shelter beneath. There was only the gap, the yawning, infinite emptiness. But chaos, it seems, was not stable. The ancient Greeks understood something profound. Absolute nothingness cannot last. The void itself is pregnant with possibility. And from that possibility something came. The first thing to emerge from chaos was Gaia, the earth. Not the earth as a planet floating in space. The Greeks did not think in those terms. Gaia was solidity itself. She was the foundation, the ground of being, the first surface upon which anything could stand. She came into existence not through creation but through emergence, like a dreamer slowly becoming aware, like form crystallizing out of formlessness. Hesiod calls her wide-bosomed earth, the ever-sure foundation of all. She is stable, generous, and vast. From her all else will come. She is the great mother, the source, the beginning of the physical world. And Gaia was not alone for long. From chaos, or perhaps from Gaia herself, the sources are ambiguous, came other primordial beings. Tartarus emerged. The deep, gloomy pit far beneath the earth. A place of imprisonment and punishment, as far below the surface as the sky is above it. Then came Eros, not the cute, chubby cherub of Roman art, but a primal force of attraction. The power that draws things together, the cosmic principle of union and generation. Night and day, Erebus and ate her, darkness and light, the lower and upper air. The primordial forces were taking shape, organizing themselves, establishing the basic structure of reality. But it was Gaia who would drive the story forward. For Gaia had the power to bring forth life from herself alone, without a partner. She was complete unto herself, a universe in one being. First, she brought forth the mountains, the high peaks, the rocky spines of the world, the places where earth reaches up toward the heavens. Can you imagine it? The first mountains, rising from the flat expanse, breaking the monotony of the plain, creating shadow and height and perspective. Then Gaia gave birth to Pontos, the sea, the great, barren waters, restless and deep, surrounding the land. The sea was not a gentle thing in Greek myth. It was wild, dangerous, a realm of monsters and mysteries. But it was necessary. The world now had shape, land and sea, mountain and plain. And finally, Gaia brought forth Ouranos, the sky. Ouranos, whom the Romans would later call Uranus. The starry heaven, the great dome that arches over the earth. Hesiod tells us that Gaia created him equal to herself, to cover her on every side. The sky was not merely above the earth. It was her match, her partner, her equal. And here something crucial happens. Ouranos was not just Gaia's creation. He became her consort, her husband. The earth and the sky came together, and from their union, the first generation of divine beings would be born. Think about what this represents. The most primal act of creation. Earth and sky embracing, the solid and the ethereal joined. In many cultures, this image recurs. Father Sky and Mother Earth, the cosmic parents whose union makes all life possible. But in the Greek telling, this union will not be peaceful or harmonious for long, because Ouranos, the sky, was not content merely to exist. He had desires and fears, and from those desires and fears, the first cosmic tragedy would unfold. The world now had structure, earth and sky, mountain and sea. The void of chaos was giving way to order, to form, to a cosmos, a word the Greeks used to mean both order and beauty. But this order was fragile. It had been born from formlessness, and it would be tested by violence. Gaia and Ouranos were about to become parents. And with parenthood would come fear, the fear of being replaced, the fear of one's own children, the fear that haunts every dynasty and every throne. The age of the first gods was beginning, but so was the age of the first crimes. Gaia and Ouranos, the first cosmic dynasty. Earth and sky. Gaia and Ouranos, the first cosmic dynasty. Their union was constant. Ouranos covered Gaia completely, embracing her, pressing down upon her. Day and night, the sky wrapped the earth in his starry cloak, and from this embrace children were born. But these were not ordinary children. First came the Titans, 12 of them, 6 sons and 6 daughters. Their names echo through Greek mythology like thunder. Okeanos, the river that encircles the world. Koios and Krios, Hyperion and Iapetos. And Chronos, whom the Romans called Saturn, the youngest and most cunning of them all. The daughters, Thea, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, Phoebe, and Tethys. Each of them vast, powerful, representing fundamental aspects of the cosmos. These were not gods as we might imagine them, human-like figures walking among temples. These were elemental beings, closer to forces of nature than to persons. They were enormous, ancient, powerful beyond measure. The very word Titan suggests strain and struggle, something held under tension. But the Titans were not the only offspring of earth and sky. There were also the Cyclopes, 3 of them, giants with a single round eye in the center of their foreheads. Brontes, Steripes, and Argesh, thunder, lightning, and bright. These were the smiths, the craftsmen of thunder and storm, the masters of primordial fire. And strangest of all, there were the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones. 3 brothers, Katos, Briareos, and Gaius. Imagine them. 50 heads on each pair of shoulders, 100 arms sprouting from each massive body. Monsters of unimaginable strength, terrifying even to look upon. Gaia's children were wonders and terrors. And Ouranos, looking upon them, felt something curdle in his heart. Fear. This is the moment when the pattern begins, the pattern that will repeat through 3 generations, the curse that will haunt this divine family until the world itself is remade. Ouranos looked at his children and saw not heirs, not helpers, not the continuation of his line. He saw threats. He saw rivals. He saw beings who might one day challenge his supremacy over the cosmos. And so he made a decision. He would not let them live free. Hesiod tells us that Ouranos hated his children from the moment they were born. Perhaps it was their strangeness, the Cyclopes with their single eyes, the Hecatonchires with their 100 hands. Perhaps it was their power, even as infants they were mighty. Or perhaps it was simply the fear that grips all tyrants. The knowledge that what you have taken by force can be taken from you in turn. Whatever the reason, Ouranos acted. He would not kill his children, perhaps he could not, but he could imprison them. As soon as each child was born, Ouranos seized it and thrust it back into the body of Gaia herself. Down into the deep places of the earth, into caverns and chasms, into the dark. He imprisoned them in their mother's womb, in her depths, where they could not see the light of day or breathe the upper air. Imagine Gaia's suffering. She had brought forth these children with labor and pain, and now she was forced to hold them prisoner inside herself. She could feel them moving in her depths, struggling, crying out. The weight of them, the pressure, it was agony. And still Ouranos came to her, night after night, pressing down upon her, covering her completely. She could not escape. She could not refuse him. She was the earth, fixed in place, and he was the sky, inescapable. The Titans, the Cyclopes, the hundred-handed ones, all of them trapped in darkness, imprisoned by their own father, entombed in the flesh of their mother. This is one of the darkest images in Greek mythology. The children buried alive, the mother suffering, the father tyrannical and paranoid. It speaks to something profound about the nature of power. Ouranos had everything. He was the sky itself, the master of the cosmos. But it was not enough. He needed to control, to dominate, to ensure that no one could challenge him. And in doing so, he planted the seeds of his own destruction. Because Gaia would not endure this forever. Deep in her suffering, a plan began to form. She was the earth, solid, patient, enduring. But even the earth has limits. Even the earth can crack. And when it does, the results are catastrophic. Gaia spoke to her imprisoned children. Through the rock, through the darkness, she whispered to them. She told them of their father's crime. She told them of her pain. And she asked them, "Which of you will help me? Which of you will stand against your father? Which of you has the courage to end this suffering?" Most of them were afraid. The Cyclopes, the hundred-handed ones, they cowered in the darkness. Even the older Titans hesitated. To defy Ouranos, the sky himself, seemed impossible. He was their father. He was their world. How could they rise against him? But one of them answered. Chronos, the youngest Titan, stepped forward. Cunning, ambitious, unafraid. He said, "I will do it." And Gaia, in her suffering and her rage, made him a weapon. Birth and imprisonment of the Titans. Gaia reached deep within herself, into her elemental substance, and from her very body she drew forth a material, adamant, the hardest substance in existence, gray and unyielding, sharper than any earthly metal. From this, she fashioned a great sickle, a harvesting blade, curved and keen. She gave this weapon to Chronos, and with it she gave him instructions. Ouranos would come again, as he always did, to cover the earth in darkness. And when he did, Chronos must be ready. This was not merely revenge. This was revolution. This was the first act of cosmic rebellion. The first time a child had raised a hand against a parent. The first rupture in the chain of authority that bound the universe together. The Titans waited. Deep in the earth, Chronos gripped his sickle and listened. Above, Ouranos spread himself across the sky, drawing night around the world like a cloak, eager as always to embrace his wife. The sky descended, and Gaia, suffering and resolute, opened herself to him one last time. Ouranos pressed down upon the earth, lost in his desire, unaware of what awaited him in the darkness below. And Chronos struck. From his hidden place, Chronos reached up with the great sickle and severed his father's genitals. One swift, terrible stroke. The organs fell, cut away, and Ouranos recoiled in agony and shock. The sky pulled back, away from the earth, fleeing upward. And in that separation, space opened. For the first time, there was distance between earth and sky. Air rushed into the gap. The first true day dawned, with light between the ground and the heavens. Ouranos retreated to the heights, wounded and powerless. He would never again embrace Gaia. He would never again imprison his children. His reign was over, and Chronos stood triumphant, the bloody sickle in his hand, the liberator of his siblings. But this act of violence would have consequences no one could foresee. As Ouranos withdrew, bleeding, drops of his blood fell upon Gaia, and from those drops new beings were born, the Tyrannies, the Furies, spirits of vengeance, with snakes for hair and eyes that wept blood. They were born from the violence of this first patricide, and they would forever haunt those who committed such crimes. Also born from that blood, the Gigantes, the giants, enormous and terrible, who would one day wage their own war against the gods, and the Melii, nymphs of the ash tree, gentler beings, but still marked by their origin in bloodshed. And the severed genitals themselves? They did not simply fall to the earth. Chronos cast them away, behind him, and they fell into the sea. Around them the waters began to foam, white foam, surging and swirling, gathering around that divine flesh. And from that foam, born on the waves, a goddess would one day be born. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty and desire, born from violence, born from the sea. But that is a story for another time. The deed was done. Ouranos was defeated, castrated, driven to the far heights of the cosmos where he would remain forever, passive and distant, the starry sky but no longer a ruler. The Titans were free. From the depths of the earth they emerged, blinking in the new light. The Cyclopes, the 100-handed ones, the 12 Titans, all of them released at last from their imprisonment. They stumbled into the world, these primordial giants, and looked around at a cosmos transformed. There was space now. There was air. There was distance between earth and sky. The world had room to breathe. And Chronos, the liberator, the avenger, stood at the center of it all. The other Titans looked to him. He had done what none of them dared. He had ended their suffering. He had defeated the tyrant. And so, without question, without contest, Chronos assumed the throne. The age of Ouranos was over. The age of the Titans, the age of Chronos, had begun. But let us pause for a moment and consider what has just happened. This is not merely a story about gods and monsters. It is a story about power, how it is taken, how it is held, and how it corrupts. Ouranos ruled through fear and violence. He imprisoned his children to secure his own position. But that very act of imprisonment created the conditions for his downfall. By suppressing his offspring, he ensured they would hate him. By showing them cruelty, he taught them cruelty. And Chronos, who had every reason to despise tyranny, who had felt the suffering of imprisonment, who had been the great liberator, Chronos would learn nothing from his father's mistakes. This is the tragedy at the heart of Greek myth. The pattern repeats. The son overthrows the father, only to become a tyrant himself. Liberation becomes oppression. The victims become victimizers. Why? What is it about power that makes even the noblest rebel into a paranoid king? The Greeks understood this. They had seen it in their own history, in their own cities. Kings rising and falling, fathers and sons locked in deadly rivalry. Each generation convinced that they would be different, that they would break the cycle. But the cycle holds. And so Chronos took the throne, and the Titans entered their golden age, and for a time, for a long time, it seemed that a new and better order had been established. But deep inside Chronos, in a place he would not acknowledge even to himself, a seed of fear had been planted. His father's fear, the fear of being replaced, The rise of Chronos and the new reign. Chronos ruled, and for an age the world knew a kind of peace. This was the time the Greeks would later call the Golden Age, a time before humans, before cities, before war and grief and toil. The Titans governed a young world, a world still learning its own laws. Chronos married his sister Rhea, another of the Titans, a goddess of fertility and motherhood, strong and nurturing. Together they ruled from their heights, and the cosmos settled into its patterns. The other Titans took their own domains. Ouranos became the great river that encircles the earth. Hyperion fathered the sun, the moon, and the dawn. Helios, Selene, and Eos, who would light the world with their radiance. Iapetos would father Prometheus and Epimetheus, those tragic figures who would one day shape the fate of humankind. The Titans were not evil. They were not monsters. They were the gods of the first age, the rulers of a simpler, stranger time. But they were also old in a way that carried weight, carried weariness, carried the memory of blood and darkness. And Chronos, at the center of it all, sat upon his throne and tried to convince himself he was nothing like his father. But he had made one crucial error. Do you remember the Cyclopes? The three smiths with the single eyes, who had been imprisoned with the Titans in the depths of Gaia. Do you remember the Hecatonchires? The 100-handed ones, monstrous and mighty? When Chronos freed the Titans, he freed them as well. They emerged blinking into the light, grateful, ready to serve their liberator. But Chronos looked at them, truly looked at them, and he felt something cold in his chest. Fear. They were too powerful, too strange, too dangerous. The Cyclopes could forge weapons that could shake the cosmos. The 100-handed ones could hurl 100 boulders at once. In a battle, they would be unstoppable. And if they ever turned against him, so Chronos made a choice. The same choice his father had made. He cast the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires back into the darkness. Back into Tartarus, that deep pit beneath the earth, that prison at the root of the world. He bound them there with chains and locked the gates. Gaia must have wept to see it. Her children, for whom she had suffered so much, imprisoned once again. The cycle repeating, the liberator becoming the jailer. But Chronos did not see it that way. He told himself it was necessary. He told himself it was for the good of the cosmos, for the stability of his reign. He told himself he was not like his father. And for a long time, perhaps he believed it. Chronos ruled, and Rhea was at his side, and the world turned through its seasons. The Golden Age unfolded. There was abundance and peace, at least for the gods. But Rhea noticed something. She saw the way Chronos would sometimes stare into the distance, his jaw tight, his eyes clouded. She saw how he startled at unexpected sounds. She saw how he questioned the loyalty of his siblings, how he kept his counsel secret, how he trusted no one fully. The wound that Ouranos had inflicted, not the physical wound, but the spiritual one, had not healed. Chronos carried his father's fear like a poison in his veins. And then Rhea told him she was pregnant. A child, an heir, the continuation of the line. Chronos should have been overjoyed. Any king would celebrate the birth of a son or daughter. But when Rhea told him, she saw something flicker across his face. Not joy, terror, because Chronos knew. Somewhere deep in his bones, he knew. The pattern would repeat. It always did. He had overthrown his father. And one day his own child would overthrow him. This is the curse of the tyrant. to see threats everywhere, to trust no one, to poison even the joy of fatherhood with paranoia. But there was more. There was a prophecy. We do not know who spoke it. Perhaps Gaia herself, weary of watching her children hurt one another. Perhaps Ouranos, from his distant heights, pronouncing a curse upon his son. Or perhaps Chronos simply knew it in his heart, the way all usurpers know their fate. The prophecy said, "One of your children will dethrone you, as you dethroned your father." And with those words, the golden age began to tarnish. The peace began to crack. Because Chronos, hearing this prophecy, made a decision. He would not be overthrown. He would not suffer his father's fate. He would do whatever was necessary to keep his throne. Whatever was necessary. Rhea felt the child growing within her, and she was happy. But she also felt the coldness growing in her husband, and she was afraid. She did not yet know what Chronos was planning, but she would find out soon enough. Chronos' paranoia and the devouring of his children. Rhea's labor began. Deep in the halls of the Titans, she brought forth her first child. A daughter, beautiful, powerful, divine. Hestia, goddess of the hearth, of home and warmth and the sacred fire. Rhea held her daughter, this perfect being, and looked into her eyes. She felt the overwhelming rush of love that all mothers feel. She turned to Chronos, smiling, ready to share this moment with him. And Chronos reached out his hands. Rhea, trusting, placed the baby in his arms. And Chronos opened his mouth and swallowed the child whole. Rhea screamed. She lunged for him, but it was too late. Hestia was gone, swallowed down into the darkness of her father's belly. Not dead. The gods cannot die, but imprisoned, trapped in the void of Chronos' stomach, unable to grow, unable to live. Chronos looked at his wife, and his face was stone. "It is necessary," he said. "The prophecy." But Rhea could not hear him over her own screaming. She beat her fists against his chest. She cursed him. She wept. It did not matter. The deed was done. Months passed. Rhea became pregnant again. And this time she knew what would happen. She begged Chronos to reconsider. She pleaded. She swore the child would never threaten him. But Chronos would not listen. The fear had consumed him entirely. There was no room left for love, for trust, for mercy. When the second child was born, Demeter, goddess of harvest and grain, Chronos took her from Rhea's arms and swallowed her as well. Then came the third child, Hera, who would have been queen of the gods, regal and powerful. Swallowed. The fourth, a son this time, Hades, lord of the underworld, dark and stern. Swallowed. And the fifth, Poseidon, god of the sea, of earthquakes and storms. Swallowed. 5 times, Rhea gave birth. 5 times. She held her child for only a moment before Chronos tore the baby from her arms and devoured it. 5 times, she felt a piece of her soul die. And Chronos sat on his throne, his belly full of his own children, and told himself he was safe. The prophecy would not come to pass. He had defeated it. He was more cunning than his father, more ruthless, more willing to do what must be done. But inside his stomach, in the darkness, the 5 children remained. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. Trapped but alive, aware but helpless. They could not grow, could not act, could not escape. But they could remember, and they could hate. This is perhaps the darkest chapter in all of Greek mythology. There are myths of patricide, of matricide, of wars and rapes and betrayals. But this, a father devouring his own children, one by one, while their mother watches helplessly. This touches something primal in us. This is the violation of the most sacred bond, the corruption of love into horror. What would drive someone to such an act? Fear. Pure, undiluted fear. Chronos was trapped in a prison of his own making. He had taken the throne by violence, and he knew that it could be taken from him the same way. Every child was a potential assassin. Every smile hid a dagger. He saw threats everywhere because he himself had been a threat. This is the tyrant's paradox. The very actions taken to secure power undermine it. By devouring his children, Chronos ensured they would hate him. By giving in to fear, he created the very enemy he sought to prevent. And this pattern, this terrible repeating pattern, is central to the Greek understanding of kingship and power. The Greeks had seen it play out in their own history. They knew that power corrupts, that fear breeds cruelty, that every tyrant eventually falls. But the myth goes further. It suggests that this is not just a political reality but a cosmic one. The universe itself, in its very structure, follows this pattern of succession through violence. Father against son, son against father, each generation rising in blood. Is there any escape from this cycle? Can it be broken? The Greeks would say only through Zeus, only through the final overthrow, the last great war, the establishment of a new and better order. But we are not there yet. Rhea withdrew into herself. She could barely look at Chronos. The love she had felt for him had curdled into something else. Not quite hate, but close. A deep, abiding horror at what he had become. And then, inevitably, she became pregnant for the 6th time. As she felt the child growing within her, Rhea made a decision. Not this one. This child she would save. No matter what it cost her. No matter what she had to do. This child would live. She began to plan. In secret, in the depths of her grief, she plotted. She would deceive Chronos. She would trick the trickster, outwit the cunning one. She thought of Gaia, her mother, who had made a weapon to defeat Ouranos. She thought of the pattern, son against father, mother enabling son. And she understood that she was part of something larger than herself. She was a link in a chain of necessity, a player in a cosmic drama that had been unfolding since the first emergence from chaos. She would need help. She would need a safe place to give birth, far from Chronos and his watchful eyes. She would need allies. And she would need, above all, courage. The time was coming. Her belly swelled with the 6th child, and Chronos watched her with his cold, paranoid eyes, waiting. Rhea smiled at him. She touched her belly. She spoke softly about the child to come. And inside she was planning his downfall. Rhea's rebellion and the secret birth of Zeus. When Rhea's time drew near, she went to her mother, Gaia, the earth who had suffered the imprisonment of her children. Gaia, who had armed Chronos with the sickle. Gaia, who had seen the pattern repeat and was weary of the bloodshed. Mother, Rhea said, "Help me." And Gaia, looking at her daughter, at this mother about to lose her 6th child, made her choice. She would help. She would break the cycle, or at least give it a chance to break. Together they made a plan. There was an island far across the sea, Crete. On that island rose a mountain, Mount Ida, or in some tellings, Mount Dicte. Deep in that mountain was a cave, hidden and sacred, surrounded by forest and protected by ancient magic. That was where Rhea would go. Gaia arranged everything. She sent word to allies, the nymphs of Crete, spirits of grove and stream, loyal to the old ways. They would help. They would protect the child. And when everything was ready, Rhea made her escape. She told Chronos she needed to go to a sacred grove to prepare for the birth, to perform the proper rituals. He was suspicious, Chronos was always suspicious, but he had no proof of deception. And besides, he was confident. 5 children already swallowed. What was one more? So Rhea left, and Chronos watched her go, and he settled back to wait. He did not know he would be waiting forever. Rhea traveled swiftly, across the sea to Crete, up the slopes of the mountain into the hidden cave. The nymphs were waiting for her, gentle beings with leaves in their hair and kindness in their eyes. And there, in the darkness of the cave, far from Chronos and his devouring hunger, Rhea brought forth her 6th child. Asson. The moment he was born, the world shifted. Thunder rolled across the sky. Eagles circled overhead. The very rocks of the cave seemed to hum with power. This was no ordinary child. Rhea held him, this perfect son, and wept. But this time, her tears were not only grief. They were also joy, because this one would live. This one would grow. This one would fulfill the prophecy, not as a victim but as an avenger. She named him Zeus, but the danger was not past. Chronos would expect her to return with the child. He would expect to swallow it as he had swallowed the others. And here the plan reached its most audacious point. Gaia took a stone, a large, smooth stone, roughly the size and weight of a newborn god. She wrapped it in swaddling clothes, carefully, lovingly, so that it looked exactly like a baby bundled for warmth. And she gave it to Rhea. Rhea returned to Chronos with the bundle in her arms. She approached him, her face carefully neutral. "Another child," she said. Chronos looked at the bundle. He held out his hands. And Rhea, her heart pounding, placed the stone in his arms. Chronos did not look closely. Why would he? He had done this 5 times before. It was routine now, this terrible ritual. He opened his mouth and swallowed the stone whole. It settled in his stomach with the 5 children already trapped there. Chronos felt a moment of discomfort. The stone was heavier than the others, harder, but he dismissed it. It was done. The prophecy was defeated. He was safe. Rhea bowed her head, hiding her smile. She withdrew, and Chronos, satisfied, returned to his throne. He never suspected. He never knew. And far away, in a cave on Crete, the child Zeus began to grow. The nymphs cared for him. They sang to him, played with him, protected him from any who might discover his presence. But Zeus needed more than care. He needed nourishment. There was a goat, a magical goat, in some tellings a nymph who had taken animal form, named Amalthea. She gave her milk to the infant Zeus, and he drank deeply, and he grew strong. So strong, in fact, that when he nursed, he broke off one of Amalthea's horns. But from that broken horn came a wondrous thing, the cornucopia, the horn of plenty, from which would flow endless abundance. Even as an infant, Zeus brought blessings and power. But there was one problem: babies cry. And if Zeus cried, the sound might carry on the wind. It might reach ears that should not hear. It might alert Chronos that somewhere, hidden, his youngest child still lived. So the nymphs made a plan. Whenever Zeus began to cry, they would dance around him, clashing cymbals and beating drums, making such a noise that his cries would be drowned out. And so Zeus grew, surrounded by sound and secrecy, by love and vigilance. He grew from infant to child, from child to youth, from youth to man. He grew tall and strong, with eyes like storm clouds and a voice like thunder. He grew and he waited, because Rhea had told him everything. She had told him about his siblings, trapped in their father's belly. She had told him about the prophecy. She had told him what Chronos had done, what he had become. And Zeus understood what he had to do. This was not merely revenge, though there was revenge in it. This was not merely ambition, though there was ambition too. This was destiny. Zeus had been born for one purpose: to overthrow his father and free his siblings, to break the pattern, or at least to carry it forward to its final iteration. He was the sixth child, the hidden one, the one who survived. And when he was ready, when he was strong enough, clever enough, powerful enough, he would return. He would face Chronos, and he would end the age of the Titans forever. The time was coming, the final confrontation, the war that would remake the world. Zeus' preparation, revolt, and the freeing of the Olympians. Zeus came down from the mountain. He was no longer a child. He was a god in his full power, tall and commanding, with lightning playing around his fingers and thunder in his voice. The nymphs had taught him wisdom. Amalthea had given him strength. Gaia and Rhea had taught him purpose. Now he would teach Chronos fear. But Zeus was not a fool. He knew he could not simply storm his father's halls and expect to win. Chronos was still mighty, still the king of the Titans. A direct assault would fail. No, Zeus needed a plan. He needed to be cunning like his father before him. He needed to free his siblings. With the help of Gaia and Rhea, Zeus prepared a potion, a mixture of wine and mustard, though some sources say nectar mixed with a powerful emetic. It was designed for one purpose: to make Chronos vomit, to make him disgorge everything he had swallowed. Zeus disguised himself. He took on the appearance of a cupbearer, a servant, someone beneath notice, and he infiltrated the halls where Chronos held court, where the Titans gathered to feast and celebrate their unending reign. Chronos sat on his throne, a golden cup in his hand, confident and secure. He never saw the danger. Zeus approached with a wine jug. He bowed low. He offered to pour for the great king. And Chronos, barely glancing at this servant, held out his cup. Zeus poured the mixture, his hand steady, his face calm. Chronos raised the cup to his lips and drank deeply. And then it began. Chronos' eyes went wide. His stomach convulsed. He doubled over, the cup falling from his hand, shattering on the floor. And he vomited. First came the stone that Rhea had wrapped in swaddling clothes all those years ago. It flew from Chronos' mouth and struck the ground, and where it landed, Gaia would later preserve it as a monument at Delphi, a memorial to the trick that saved the gods. Then came the children. One by one, in reverse order of their swallowing, they emerged from Chronos' belly. Poseidon first, god of the sea, wild-haired and furious, with eyes like the deep ocean. Then Hades, dark and stern, lord of the underworld, his face carved from shadow. Then Hera, regal and terrible in her rage, future queen of the gods. Then Demeter, goddess of the harvest, with golden grain in her hair and fury in her heart. And finally, Hestia, the eldest, goddess of the hearth, gentle but unbreakable. They stood before Chronos, these 5 gods who had been trapped in darkness for so long. They were fully grown. Time worked strangely for the divine, and they were glorious and terrible to behold. Chronos staggered back from his throne, retching, weakened. He looked up at his children, and he saw what he had always feared, his doom standing before him. And then Zeus dropped his disguise. He stood in his true form, radiant and mighty, lightning crackling around him. "Father," he said, and his voice shook the halls. "Your reign is over." Chronos tried to rise. He tried to summon his power, to call on his fellow titans. But he was weakened, both by the potion and by the shock of what had happened. The prophecy, the cursed prophecy, it was coming true. "You cannot defeat me. I am the king. I overthrew Ouranos himself. And I," Zeus said calmly, "am your son." The 6 Olympians, for that is what they would come to be called, after the mountain where they would make their home, stood together. 6 siblings, united in purpose, ready to take back what had been stolen from them, the freedom to exist, the right to live, the future that had been denied them. SFX, 6 heartbeats, synchronizing into one powerful rhythm. But Zeus knew this was only the beginning. Chronos was not alone. He had brothers and sisters, the other titans, loyal to him or at least unwilling to give up their power without a fight. This would not be a simple overthrow. This would be war. War on a cosmic scale. War that would shake the foundations of the world. The Titanomachy. But first, Zeus had to make an alliance of his own. He remembered what Chronos had forgotten. The Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, still imprisoned in Tartarus, still chained in the darkness where Chronos had thrown them. If Zeus could free them, if he could earn their loyalty, he would have allies of unimaginable power. So while the other Olympians gathered their strength, Zeus descended. Down, down, past the roots of the earth, into Tartarus itself, that gloomy pit where even gods feared to tread. He found them there. The 3 Cyclopes, the 300-handed ones, chained and forgotten, abandoned by the very king they had helped to free. Zeus broke their chains, and he said, "Will you fight with me? Will you help me overthrow the tyrant who imprisoned you?" The Cyclopes looked at this young god, this liberator, and they smiled. They remembered Chronos' betrayal. They had waited for this moment. "We will fight," they said, "and we will forge you weapons such as the world has never seen." The Cyclopes set to work, with their single eyes gleaming, with their ancient knowledge of fire and metal. They crafted 3 weapons. For Zeus, a thunderbolt, bright, searing, capable of striking down even the mightiest foe. For Poseidon, a trident, sharp and powerful, able to command the seas and shake the earth. For Hades, a helmet of invisibility, dark as the underworld, making its wearer unseen and unknowable. Armed with these weapons, blessed by these ancient craftsmen, the Olympians prepared for war. And the 100-handed ones? They pledged themselves to Zeus as well. Each one could hurl 100 boulders at once, could fight an army single-handedly. They would be a force unstoppable. Everything was ready. The alliances were made. The weapons were forged. The cause was just. All that remained was the battle itself. Zeus looked at his siblings. Poseidon, fierce and eager. At Hades, grim and determined. at Hera, Demeter, and Hestia, each preparing in their own way. "This is the moment," he said. "This is what we were born for, to end the tyranny of the Titans, to establish a new order, to claim our right to rule." They nodded, these gods who had never known freedom, who had spent their first moments of existence in the darkness of their father's belly. They were ready, and so the war began. Titanomachy, Tartarus, Gigantomachy, and the rise of Olympus. The Titanomachy, the war between the Titans and the Olympians, the war that would determine the fate of the cosmos. It lasted 10 years. 10 years of battle so fierce that the earth itself trembled. 10 years of lightning and earthquake, of fire and flood, of mountains hurled like spears and the sea boiling with rage. The Titans gathered under Chronos' banner. They were mighty, these old gods. They had ruled for an age. They commanded forces primordial and terrible. But the Olympians had youth, fury, and the weapons of the Cyclopes. Zeus stood at the forefront, his thunderbolt blazing in his hand. Each time he hurled it, the sky split open. Thunder rolled across the heavens. The very air burned with the power of his wrath. Poseidon raised his trident and struck the earth, and earthquakes shattered the land. He called upon the seas, and tsunamis rose to swallow the Titans' strongholds. Hades, wearing his helmet of invisibility, moved like a shadow through the battlefield, striking where the Titans least expected, sowing terror and confusion. And the hundred-handed ones, Katos, Briareos, and Gaius, they were devastating. Each one could hurl 100 boulders at once, a rain of stone that crushed armies. The Titans had never faced such power, but the Titans fought back with all their ancient strength. Chronos wielded his sickle, the same blade that had castrated Ouranos. The other Titans called upon the elements, upon the old powers of the world. For 10 years, neither side could gain the advantage. The war ground on, devastating the earth, tearing the sky, threatening to unmake creation itself. Mountains crumbled, forests burned. The seas raged beyond their bounds. It seemed that the cosmos might tear itself apart, that all would return to chaos. But slowly, painfully, the tide began to turn. The Olympians were winning. Their weapons were too powerful, their allies too fierce, and most importantly, their cause was just. They fought not to preserve tyranny but to end it. One by one, the Titans began to fall. Not dead, the gods cannot truly die, but defeated, broken, cast down from their heights. And when the final battle came, when Zeus faced Chronos in single combat, the outcome was inevitable. Zeus raised his thunderbolt. Lightning flashed, brighter than 1,000 suns. And Chronos fell. The Titanomachy ended. The Olympians stood victorious, bloodied but unbroken. And now came the question: what to do with the defeated Titans? Zeus looked at Chronos, his father, lying defeated before him. He thought about mercy. He thought about forgiveness. But he also remembered the 5 of his siblings swallowed alive. He remembered his mother's tears. He remembered hiding in a cave, growing up in secret, denied his birthright. And he made his decision. The Titans would be imprisoned, cast down into Tartarus, that deep pit beneath the earth, as far below the surface as the sky is above it. It would take a bronze anvil 9 days to fall from earth to Tartarus. That is how deep it was, a place of eternal darkness, of punishment, of exile. The Titans were bound in chains and hurled into that pit. Chronos, who had swallowed his children, the other titans who had fought for him, all of them cast down, imprisoned, removed from the world they had once ruled. And to guard them, Zeus stationed the 100-handed ones at the gates of Tartarus. No one would escape. The age of the Titans was over, buried deep in the earth, locked away where they could never threaten the new order. But the Olympians' trials were not quite finished. Because Gaia, the earth, was not entirely pleased with what had happened. Her children, the Titans, had been defeated and imprisoned. Yes, Chronos had been a tyrant. Yes, the Olympians had cause for their rebellion. But Gaia saw the pattern continuing. Violence begetting violence. Children cast down by children. And in her grief and rage, she brought forth one final challenge. The giants. The gigantomachy, the war with the giants. These were not gods but something else. Enormous, powerful beings born from the blood of Ouranos when he was castrated, born from violence and rage. They were the earth's children, and they rose up to challenge the Olympians' right to rule. The giants were fearsome. They could not be killed by gods alone. A prophecy said that a mortal hero would be needed to strike the final blow. But the Olympians had grown strong. They had won the titanomachy. They were not about to lose their hard-won throne. Zeus called upon his allies. The gods armed themselves once more. And with the help of Heracles, the mortal hero half-god, who would one day become divine himself, they faced the giants in battle. This war was shorter than the titanomachy but no less fierce. The giants hurled mountains. The gods struck back with lightning and earthquake, with fire and flood. And in the end, the gods prevailed. The giants were defeated. Some were buried beneath mountains, still struggling. Some were cast into Tartarus with the Titans. The threat was ended. And finally, the cosmos was at peace. Zeus stood victorious. Around him, his siblings, his allies, his new pantheon. They had won. They had defeated the Titans and the giants. They had established their right to rule through strength and justice. And now they needed a home. They chose Mount Olympus, the highest peak in Greece, its summit shrouded in clouds, touching the sky itself. There they built their palaces, their halls of gold and marble. There they established their thrones. Zeus, the king of the gods, ruler of the sky and thunder. Poseidon, lord of the seas and earthquakes. Hades, king of the underworld, though he would dwell below, in his dark realm, ruling over the dead. Hera, queen of the gods, Zeus' wife and sister. Demeter, goddess of the harvest and the grain. Hestia, goddess of the hearth and home. And in time, other gods would join them. Athena would spring from Zeus' head, goddess of wisdom and war. Apollo and Artemis would be born, gods of sun and moon, of music and the hunt. Aphrodite, born from the sea foam, would bring love and beauty. Hephaestus would forge wonders in his workshops. Ares would embody war. Hermes would race across the world as messenger and trickster. The Olympian pantheon was established. The age of heroes was about to begin. From chaos to Olympus, from the formless void to the gleaming heights of divine civilization. The journey was complete. The succession of power, Ouranos to Chronos to Zeus, had reached its end. Zeus would not be overthrown. He was the final king, the ultimate victor, or so the Greeks believed. The pattern at last was broken. The world was ready now for human beings, for heroes, for the great stories that would define Greek culture. The gods were in place, the cosmic order established. And from their thrones on Olympus, they would look down on the world below and begin to shape the destiny of mortals. But that is another story. Meaning, symbolism, and legacy. And so we come to the end of our journey. From chaos to cosmos. From the void to Olympus. From formlessness to the structured pantheon that would define Greek religion and culture for over 1,000 years. But what does this myth mean? Why did the Greeks tell this story? What were they trying to understand? On the surface, it is a story about the birth of the gods, a theogony, a divine genealogy. It explains where Zeus and the Olympians came from, how they came to power, what they overcame to claim their throne. But deeper than that, this myth is about patterns. About the cycles of power and violence that seem to govern both divine and human realms. 3 generations: Ouranos, Chronos, Zeus. 3 fathers. 3 sons who overthrew them. Ouranos imprisoned his children in the earth. Chronos castrated him and took the throne. Chronos devoured his children. Zeus tricked him and took the throne. Each generation the same pattern. Each ruler gripped by fear of being replaced. Each son rising up in justified rage. This is the nightmare of kingship, the anxiety of power. Those who rule must always wonder, will my children love me, or will they see me as an obstacle to be removed? The Greeks knew this pattern intimately. They had seen it in their own history. Kings overthrown, sons in conflict with fathers, dynasties rising and falling. This myth takes that human reality and projects it onto the cosmic scale, suggesting that the struggle for power is not merely a human failing but a fundamental law of existence. But notice, the pattern ends with Zeus. Zeus is not overthrown. He rules for eternity. The succession stops with him. Why? Perhaps because Zeus represents something different. Unlike his father and grandfather, Zeus does not rule through fear alone. He establishes justice. He creates order. He shares power with his siblings, each god receiving their own domain. Zeus is not a perfect ruler. The myths are full of his flaws, his infidelities, his rages. But he represents the establishment of a workable cosmic order, a system that, however imperfect, is better than the chaos and tyranny that came before. There is also the theme of order emerging from chaos. The myth begins with formless void and ends with a structured universe, governed by laws and ruled from a gleaming palace on a mountain top. This is the Greek vision of civilization itself. Out of the raw, violent forces of nature, represented by the Titans, comes a more refined, more human order, the Olympians. The Titans are elemental, vast, impersonal. The Olympians are more like us. They have personalities, desires, flaws. They are gods we can relate to even as we fear them. Tartarus, where the Titans are imprisoned, represents the burial of the unmanageable aspects of existence. Every civilization must suppress something, must lock away certain forces in order to function. The Greeks understood this. The Titans are not destroyed. They cannot be. But they are controlled, removed from the world, locked in the basement of reality. And there is the role of the feminine throughout this story. Gaia, the earth, who begins the process of creation. Rhea, who saves Zeus and makes the overthrow possible. The nymphs who protect and nurture the infant god. Without these maternal figures, the pattern would never break. It is Rhea's courage, her willingness to deceive and rebel, that ultimately changes everything. The mother's love proves stronger than the father's fear. This myth also speaks to the Greek understanding of time and change. Nothing lasts forever. Every age gives way to the next. Even the gods, even cosmic dynasties, are subject to the force of succession. But this is not necessarily tragic. Change brings renewal. The overthrow of Ouranos allowed the Titans to exist. The overthrow of Chronos allowed the Olympians, and eventually humans, to flourish. Suffering and violence are part of the story, yes, but so is growth, evolution, the movement toward something better. The legacy of this myth is vast. It influenced not only Greek religion but Greek philosophy, literature, and art. The pattern of succession appears in countless later stories. The image of Chronos devouring his children became one of the most powerful symbols in Western culture. Think of Goya's terrifying painting, of Freud's theories about fathers and sons. The Titanomachy itself became a model for understanding conflict, the war between old and new, tradition and innovation, the established order and the revolutionary force. And Zeus, for all his flaws, became the archetype of the sovereign god, the king of heaven, whose authority was borrowed and adapted by later cultures, including Rome and even, in some ways, Christianity. But perhaps most importantly, this myth reminds us that every order we know was born from chaos. Every civilization rests on violence. Every structure of power has a bloody foundation. The Greeks did not shy away from this truth. They did not pretend that the world was made by a benevolent creator who shaped things peacefully. They looked at reality, at the violence of storms, the cruelty of human history, the suffering inherent in existence, and they created a myth that honored that reality. Yes, the gods are born from violence. Yes, fathers fear their sons. Yes, power corrupts and tyrants fall. But also, order can emerge from chaos. Justice can replace tyranny. The pattern can be broken or at least transformed. There is hope in this story, even as there is tragedy. And so we leave Zeus on his throne atop Olympus, lightning bolt in hand, surveying the world he has won. The age of myth is fully begun. The gods are in their places. The cosmos has its structure. Below, on earth, humans will soon appear, created by Prometheus, shaped from clay, given fire stolen from the gods themselves. And those humans will tell stories about these gods, will build temples to them, will try to understand the forces that shape their lives. This myth, the story of the Titanomachy, the birth of the gods, the journey from chaos to Olympus, is one of those stories. It is an attempt to answer the oldest questions. Where did we come from? Why is the world the way it is? What forces govern our lives? The Greeks answered with thunder and war, with mothers and sons, with violence and hope. They answered with myth. And now, 3,000 years later, we still tell these stories. We still find meaning in them, because the questions they address have not changed. We still wonder about power and its corruptions. We still struggle with the fear of being replaced. We still see the pattern of succession playing out in our politics, our families, our lives. And we still hope that order can emerge from chaos, that justice can triumph, that the pattern someday might truly be broken, from chaos to cosmos, from the void to the heights of Olympus. This is the story the Greeks told. This is the story we remember. This is the birth of the gods.